Someone get her a coffee and then someone please get her off my screen. This is a conversation for principals. The voice dripping with the smug entitlement of a man who had never been told no echoed through the speakerphone. Marcus Thorne, senior director at Ironclad Financial, didn't even bother to look at the camera when he said it. He waved a dismissive finger at the shared Microsoft Teams screen, as if shooing away a bothersome insect and not a colleague. An icy silence fell over the call. In the 12 video windows, 6 faces from Apex Dynamics instantly hardened, jaws tightening. The other 6 faces from Ironclad Financial suddenly became intensely interested in their coffee mugs, their keyboards, or some indeterminate point on their ceilings. The call had been going smoothly until 5 minutes ago, until Eleanor Vance made the mistake of speaking. She had been presenting the final task allocation on the logistics scope for a $1.2 billion defense bid, project she had spent 18 months of her life building, from the first back-of-the-napkin sketches to the intricate operational strategy, all distilled onto a single slide. She was on the point about integrating AI into the supply chain when Marcus Thorne cut her off, his tone as cold as if she'd just misread the weather report. First came a theatrical little chuckle like a villain from a bad sitcom. "I'm sorry, who is this?" he asked. And then, without waiting for an answer, the second missile launched. "This is a conversation for principals." Just like that. A man who 3 years earlier had all but begged her to join his team was now pretending not to know her name in front of executives and potential government observers. Eleanor muted her microphone. It wasn't that she was speechless. Oh, she had words. But she knew that in battles like these, properly weaponized silence carried more weight than outrage. It was the kind of silence that made other people stir in their own mess without you having to say a word. She watched Marcus continue to pontificate, his voice as puffed up as a circus barker. Her own CEO Mark tried to smooth things over with a nervous laugh. "Let's keep our eyes on the big picture, folks," he mumbled, clearly hoping that by Monday no one would remember this mortifying moment. But Eleanor would. She would never forget. She quietly exited the shared presentation. On her desktop, she opened a subfolder, one with no discernible name, just a random string of characters. Inside, she double-clicked a file named Thorne Contingency. Screenshots, flagged emails, and internal timelines bloomed to life. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but everything precise. She'd started the file 2 months ago because Marcus Thorne walked like a man who thought HR policies were for interns. While Marcus was still monologuing, Eleanor moved her cursor. Her hand hovered, a nearly imperceptible smile touching her lips as she feigned rapt attention. Mark, her CEO, cleared his throat hesitantly. "Eleanor," he said tentatively, "maybe we'll circle back to the rollout later." "Of course," she replied, her tone as flat as drywall. "I'll update the brief." She didn't sound angry. She sounded like someone who had just solved a complex puzzle. Reflected on her screen were 2 windows. One was the shared Ironclad scope document, and the other was her own private cross-referenced and time-stamped notes. She was supposed to be Apex Dynamics' bridge on this partnership, the one who made everything run smoothly between procurement, engineering, and the tangled mess of federal compliance. She didn't need the spotlight, but she had damn well earned her seat at the table. And Marcus had just pulled that chair out from under her in front of everyone. Worse, this wasn't an isolated incident. The dismissiveness, the ego, the territorialism, it was a pattern. He wasn't just flustered. He wanted her out of the picture entirely. And he was about to get his wish, just not in the way he thought. By the time the call ended and Eleanor's mic was unmuted for the perfunctory thank yous, she had uploaded 3 documents to Apex Dynamics' internal repository. One was the original joint scope of work she herself had authored. The second was the edited draft with Ironclad Financial's changes. The third was a full transcript of the conversation where Ironclad's internal team had used her exact phrasing in their slide summary. She wasn't paranoid. She was just one step ahead. And Marcus, he had no idea. He'd just handed her the ammunition. As her colleagues signed off with strained smiles and the call ended, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, cracked her neck once, and opened her inbox. She didn't have to search. She knew exactly where it was. She scrolled down past hundreds of emails to a date 3 years ago. There it was. An email dated July 21st. The subject line read, "Regarding your decision." The sender, Marcus Thorne, Director of Recruiting, Ironclad Financial Corporation. It had been sent the morning after she'd formally rejected Ironclad's offer to be their Director of Federal Operations. The offer had been lucrative, but something about their culture had felt off. Marcus had not taken the rejection well. Eleanor smiled, not because it was funny, but because he'd made a fatal mistake. He'd put it in writing. The last line of that email said it all. "You'll learn soon enough that talented women are a dime a dozen in this town. We found someone else, a better fit." When she'd received it, she hadn't gotten angry or replied. She had simply quietly forwarded it to her personal email, BCC'd a copy to her company's legal department, and filed it away in an encrypted folder. And now she had everything she needed. She clicked Print to PDF, naming the file IF Clause Matter 9.1c violation. She wasn't here to cry or write feminist blog posts. She was here to build a paper trail, one strong enough to sink $1 billion partnership if someone stepped too far out of line. And Marcus, my friend, had just swan-dived off a cliff wearing clown shoes. The next morning, Eleanor checked her inbox and frowned. Not because it was full, but because it was unnervingly empty. The Project Phoenix Daily Digest email chain, a system she herself had built from scratch to keep every stakeholder updated, had abruptly skipped her. A chain she'd been an integral part of every single day for the past 10 months was now moving forward as if she didn't exist. At first, she assumed it was a glitch. An Outlook filter, a permissions error, the small digital hiccups that usually resolve themselves before lunch. But by noon, a heavy metallic feeling settled in her gut. The project charter was being amended. New red lines from Ironclad Financial were being added fast and sloppy. Her name had been scrubbed from the headers. The task matrix she'd designed was still there, only now it was color-coded differently and called the Creative Collaboration Framework, a meaningless piece of corporate jargon. Collaboration apparently meant, "We'll keep your structure but scrap your name." At 1:13 p.m., a ping from Mark, her CEO, appeared on Microsoft Teams. "Hey, quick note. Ironclad is pushing for a more streamlined structure. Too many voices in the room." A pause. "They just want a single point of contact from Apex. It's not personal, it's just politics." Politics. The eternal corporate excuse for "we surrendered." She typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted it again. Finally, she just wrote, "Acknowledged. Let me know how I can best support." Support, right. She would support it with every timestamp, every screenshot, and enough digital rope to hang an army of consultants. They told her to focus on archiving the documentation. So that's exactly what she did. Just not in the way they meant. Eleanor spun up a new encrypted workspace on a private cloud server, naming it EF Contingency. Inside it, she began creating nested folders, one for correspondence, one for scope creep, one for file access logs. She reconfigured her inbox to auto-tag anything with the keyword Ironclad or Phoenix. Every time they accidentally copied her on an email, she saved it. Every time someone forwarded her a message she'd been cut out of, she screenshotted the entire chain with the little blue box around the forwarded tag. She wasn't getting emotional. She was building context. Context is what the loud people always forget. Context is what you pull out in the final meeting when everyone's memory suddenly gets fuzzy. A week passed. She went from being the strategic lead to a silent operational support staffer. The calls became walled gardens. The Slack channel she'd initiated was archived. David Chen, Ironclad's new project lead, a spreadsheet samurai with the emotional range of a toaster, stopped responding to her comments in the shared planner. When she pointed out a budget discrepancy between Phase 2 and Phase 3, he replied only with, "We'll discuss with leadership," which was ironic considering leadership used to include her. She stopped offering fixes. Instead, she created copies of the files they were editing, placing them side by side for comparison. She highlighted the phrases lifted directly from her scope drafts. Phrases like predictive supply chain integration and dynamic resource allocation, terms she had invented during a late-night slide deck session fueled by Red Bull and frustration. She watched as they began to use them as if they'd pulled them from some prestigious consulting firm's report. On Thursday, she sat in on a prep call where Ironclad Financial presented the team with their updated timeline. It was her timeline identical to the detail, only with David Chen's name on the slide. Afterward, she received an email from her own COO. Thanks for sitting in today. Appreciate you letting Ironclad take the lead. It's just cleaner this way. Let me know if anything urgent needs to be documented. Cleaner. As if cutting someone out of their own plan was a kind of workflow window cleaner. She opened the voice memo app on her phone and recorded a note. Thursday, 10:47 p.m., COO referred to IF's presentation as their own, despite document matching my V10.3 from March. She wasn't paranoid. She was precise. That night she couldn't sleep. A hunch was nagging at her. She logged into Apex Dynamics' internal server and checked the file access history. She saw that a user account from Ironclad had opened a restricted Apex SharePoint folder at 2:14 a.m. the previous Saturday. The same folder that contained her redlined scope of work drafts. The same folder that should have been inaccessible from the outside. She flagged it silently privately. A screen recording of the access log archived, dated and sent to herself as an encrypted copy. They had no idea she was still watching. Over the weekend, HR called to see if she was okay. Just checking in, they said, as if she were a sad kitten and not the woman they used to call the glue of federal procurement. She told them she was fine. She always was. Because this wasn't about comfort. This was about control. They didn't want her voice. So she became the recorder, the receipt keeper, the witness to every act of copy and paste larceny that propped up the decision to erase her. She wasn't in the room anymore. That was fine. Rooms have walls. But Eleanor had windows. And the view was starting to get very interesting. Eleanor caught it during the second prep meeting with the government liaisons. It was one of those moments so deeply ironic, it was almost comical, like a scene out of a satirical film. David Chen, Ironclad Financial's project lead, was standing in front of a projector screen, laser pointer in hand, explaining how their proposed architecture would allow for asynchronous logistical overlap between phased contractor teams. Eleanor didn't even flinch. She just blinked once and tilted her head like a dog hearing a high-frequency sound no one else can perceive. Asynchronous logistical overlap. Her words. Her exact phrase. The same one she'd coined during a bleary-eyed 2 a.m. work session while trying to describe how subcontractor timelines could overlap without draining resources. She'd tested it out in a draft, worried it was too jargony. But it fit perfectly. She had used it exactly twice, once in a footnote, and once in the timeline summary on page 12 of version 9.4. A restricted document. Internal circulation only. She watched David Chen repeat the phrase again as if he'd just discovered electricity in front of a crowd that had never seen a light bulb. Her face remained a placid mask, but inside something clicked into place. As soon as the call ended, she pulled up the old file. Project Phoenix Strategy V9.4, Apex Dynamics Internal. The document was secured on Apex's server. She had sent it to a list of 6 executives on her side and 1 legal reviewer, not a single person from Ironclad. She pulled the audit log she'd saved, and there it was. 2:14 a.m., remote access. IP address, ending in .1173. User account IF integration.consultant at apexdynamics.com. A temporary user account created for Ironclad's integration testing, which was supposed to have been sandboxed, its access limited to public timelines and budget projections, not her strategic drafts. Except David Chen had been in a room he wasn't supposed to be in, leaving very clear fingerprints. She dug deeper. The session had lasted 47 minutes. 3 downloads, 2 copies saved to an external device, all of it time-stamped. She screenshotted the audit log, not just one screen, but every step, every action. She extracted the metadata from the downloaded version using a file integrity checker most people in operations didn't even know existed. Document title: Apex Internal Phoenix Proposal V9. 4. Last opened by David.C. Chen. She stared at his name for a full 5 seconds. Then she laughed a silent, mirthless little huff of air. Of course, he hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. The arrogance had made him sloppy. She zipped all the evidence into an encrypted file and uploaded it to her personal cloud drive. Then she opened a new draft email to internal legal. Subject: irregular file, access and IP overlap. Project Phoenix, no hysteria, no drama. Just cold bullet points. Unauthorized file access via sandbox account. File contained proprietary strategic language. Language subsequently used verbatim in Ironclad Financial slides. Please see attached screenshots, access logs, and metadata report. She didn't CC anyone else. There was no need. Legal knew what to do with breadcrumbs like these. She closed her laptop, poured a splash of whiskey into her coffee mug, took a sip, and then leaned back and let the implications sink in. This wasn't just plagiarism. It was theft. Strategic sloppy theft wrapped in enough arrogance to sink a ship. She thought about David Chen's face during the presentation. All confident nods and smug little pauses, as if he were waiting for applause. The way he credited Ironclad Financial's innovative collaborative model, as if he'd personally birthed it after a 4-day leadership retreat in Aspen. She knew now with absolute clarity that this wasn't accidental. They weren't just pushing her out. They were replacing her with her own shadow. The entire Ironclad Financial team was reshaping the Apex Dynamics playbook with stolen scissors, cutting her out of the picture and pasting in their own grinning faces. Fine. She opened her private workspace and added a new page. Title: Tipping Point. Underneath she typed March 9th. David Chen uses proprietary phrase from V9.4 in client-facing presentation. March 10th, unauthorized access confirmed via sandbox account. March 11th, metadata confirms file downloaded by David C. Chen. March 11th, legal notified. Digital evidence archived. She clicked lock on the page, then hit save. She didn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety, but from calculation. Because now it wasn't just about an email or an insult. Now it was about federal ethics. Because language like that, proprietary phrases inside a joint bid, could trigger intellectual property disputes. Disqualification from the bid. Even blacklisting. She had played nice, had stayed in her lane, had let them color outside the lines. But now they were coloring with her pencils and submitting the picture with her name erased. So she stopped asking questions and started building the kill switch. It had been sitting there gathering digital dust in her archive folder for 3 years, sandwiched between an old vacation schedule and an email chain about an office equipment lease. But when Eleanor typed Marcus Thorne into the search bar of her inbox, it surfaced like a landmine someone had politely wrapped in a gift box. Subject: RE. Your decision sent Tuesday, July 21, 7:02 a.m. It was the morning after she'd formally rejected Ironclad Financial's offer to be their director of federal operations. The salary had been generous, the title shiny, the perks performative. But from the first interview, the air there had smelled of cheap cologne and unspoken non-disclosure agreements. The final straw had been a VP's off-color joke about how female hires always get difficult once they get a promotion. Eleanor had smiled through it, nodded, and sent a polite rejection email within the hour. Marcus Thorne had not taken it well. His reply was short. 6 sentences. Yet it managed to be simultaneously condescending, insecure, and sexist. A masterclass in professional tone deafness. You'll regret saying no, he'd written. Women like you always realize they're replaceable. We'll be fine. And then the kill shot. We found someone else, a better fit. That morning, Eleanor had stared at the email with her eyebrows raised so high they nearly left her face. She hadn't replied, hadn't rage texted her friends, hadn't called HR, or posted it to some whisper network. Instead, she hit forward, sent it to her personal email account. Then she sent another copy, BCC'd, to Apex's internal legal contact with the subject line, FYI prior interaction, possibly relevant. That was Eleanor's way. She never let her hands shake, even when they should have been balled into fists. She documented, she archived, and then she waited. Now, in the smoldering aftermath of Ironclad Financial stealing her work, sidelining her, and pretending she was just unnecessary noise on a call, that email glowed like a red-hot dagger. She reread it. Every word now carried a different weight. Then it was just pettiness. Now it was leverage. And not just emotional leverage, contractual leverage. Because Ironclad Financial had signed a mutual non-disparagement clause when Apex agreed to partner on this bid. All team leads were subject to review. Any documented history of discrimination or misconduct could be grounds for an internal ethics review, and under Clause 9.1c could lead to the voiding of the partnership. She hovered over the email again, copied it, and pasted it into the private folder labeled Fail-Safe. Then, just to be sure, she recorded a voice memo. Retrieved July 2021 email from Marcus Thorne. Derogatory language regarding gender following job offer rejection. Context now leading IF side of federal bid. Potential violation of Clause 9.1c in Apex IF Memorandum of Understanding. The calm in her voice surprised even her. But then this had always been her rhythm. Let the world spin and make noise. She would stand still and wait for gravity to reverse itself. The next day, on an internal compliance call, she floated a question. Just to confirm, she said casually, our joint MOU still holds both parties accountable for past conduct that could affect project integrity, right? Her CEO, Mark, paused. Legal did not. That's correct, said Marcy from in-house counsel. Clause 9.1c states that any prior evidence of discriminatory or retaliatory behavior, if relevant to current leadership, must be disclosed. Why? Eleanor just smiled. Just reviewing some old files. Wanted to be sure. She didn't play her hand. Not yet. But when Apex's internal legal team quietly requested a folder review from her that evening, and when she provided a zip file marked Historical If Correspondence, Reclause 9.1c, she didn't even attach a note. The file spoke for itself. She knew what it meant. She knew that the moment Marcus Thorne had insulted her on that call, pretended she was unnecessary, acted as if he didn't remember the woman he once couldn't hire fast enough, he had stepped on his own tripwire. He had brought the knife. She had just been holding it for him all this time. It wasn't revenge. It was continuity. The kind of continuity that starts with a smirk and ends with a contract being torn apart from the inside. And the best part was he still had no idea that an email one he'd probably dashed off while smirking into his morning protein shake was now the single most dangerous document in the deal file. The kind of document that gets read aloud just before a project flatlines. The fuse wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a shouting match. There wasn't a dramatic mic drop moment. Just a mundane-looking email from Apex's internal legal department with a subject line so bland it was nearly invisible. Update on scope alignment review. Eleanor opened it, scanned it, and smiled. Legal was starting to move. They weren't calling it an investigation. Not yet. But they were auditing partner-led revisions to the joint proposal, looking at every Ironclad addition, every rewritten work item, every timeline change that had happened since Eleanor had been reassigned to document support. And that was her moment. She didn't jump into the spotlight. She just quietly passed 3 documents through the logistics channel she had always kept warm. One, a track changes version of the scope of work draft, showing Ironclad's edits against her original. 2, a side-by-side timeline comparison she'd made on a rainy Sunday afternoon, color-coded, annotated, and irrefutable. 3, the file access logs from their sandbox system, showing 3 separate entries linked to Ironclad Financial's team accessing restricted Apex files outside of scheduled review sessions. Each document told a story. But together they sang in chorus. She included no commentary, no accusations, Just a short message. Forwarding for your records. Hope these help clarify the origin of the revisions. She didn't get a reply, but that's how Apex Legal worked. No handshakes, just paper trails and pre-dawn wake-up calls. 2 days later, she noticed the tone from the Ironclad Financial team shift. Not toward her, they still kept her in her documentation cage, but toward each other. David Chen started over-explaining basic edits in meetings. Their director, Lisa Han, stopped making jokes. And Marcus Thorne? Marcus Thorne was no longer in the room. His camera was off, his name absent from prep calls, his passive-aggressive barb suddenly gone from the conversation. Something was stirring. Then the prep meeting confirmed it. Eleanor sat in the second row of the video grid, muted, smiling politely as Lisa walked the group through the org chart and resource allocation, essentially reading back a map that had once been covered in Eleanor's fingerprints. They got to slide 14. Of course, Lisa chuckled. We had to make the proposal a little less estrogen-heavy, or the feds might think this is a diversity internship instead of a delivery contract. Silence. Then a single strained laugh from someone clearly caught between sycophancy and self-preservation. Eleanor didn't flinch. She just quietly made a note on her tablet. Slide 14. Estrogen-heavy comment. Time-stamped, logged, saved. She didn't even have to report it herself. By the end of the call, someone from Apex HR had pinged legal. The Slack message came through 5 minutes later, bringing in HR. Flagged comment from IF director during prep. Maybe material based on compliance clause and team structure. Can you confirm presence on call? She typed back. Yes, present. Logged and saved recording. No opinions, no emotions, just the facts. Like a silent witness watching the arsonist return to the scene still holding the matchbox. That night, HR updated the internal log. The proposal was now under review, specifically the section on equity and inclusion, tied to federal compliance requirements. And what do you know, Clause 4.3? Stated that any partner company found to have discriminatory language or behavior could trigger a partnership fitness reassessment. She read it 6 times that night like it was scripture. She didn't dance, she didn't gloat, but deep inside she imagined thunder forming behind her eyes like an approaching storm. A storm she didn't have to summon because it was already in the forecast. The next morning, her CEO Mark reached out. A private call. No agenda. He looked tired. Hey, he started rubbing his temples. I just wanted to say, I know this hasn't been ideal. You've handled this with a lot of grace. She offered a slight smile. Thanks for that. He hesitated. Legal has started digging into some of the partner history. Compliance wants a clearer picture before the final joint sign-off. Is there anything we should know? She looked straight into the camera. Calm, professional. I think legal has what they need. He nodded slowly, almost gratefully, almost afraid. That's when she realized. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to realize that the woman they'd quietly benched was the only one in the entire organization who'd read every clause, flagged every red line, and saved every insult. She didn't need an apology. She needed altitude. And finally, she was getting it. 3 days before the final joint presentation to the Federal Review Board, Apex's CEO, Mark Connors, a man whose leadership style could best be described as a human shrug, called an emergency alignment meeting. The invitation had no agenda, just a subject line, final prep roles and speaking order. Eleanor already knew. She didn't need a calendar notification to feel the quiet execution moving toward her like a corporate guillotine. The video call opened with the usual banter, people laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Someone complimenting Ironclad Financial's slide transitions. David Chen, as usual, acted as if he'd invented PowerPoint. Mark cleared his throat, then leaned forward with the faux gravity of someone who thinks they're about to say something important. So a minor tweak to the script, he began. We've aligned with IF on the key presenters, and they've requested their director open the presentation. He paused, darting a quick glance at Eleanor. They feel it's cleaner if they set the narrative flow and we follow with support. Eleanor kept her face a perfect blank. She was supposed to be the opener. That had been the plan for 8 months. It was her work, her foundation, her strategy, her structure, her very presentation cadence born from a whiteboard and 3 weekends she could never get back. Now she was being pushed to the margins again, quietly written out of her own story. She nodded slowly. "Of course," she said, her voice even. Mark offered a relieved little smile like a dog that didn't get hit after peeing on the rug. He was about to move on to the next topic, but Eleanor cut him off. She asked just one question. A flat, lethal question. "Did you review the compliance attachments?" The temperature in the virtual room dropped 10 degrees. You could almost hear the confused blinking of pixels. I'm not following," Mark replied. Eleanor didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just clicked a browser tab and shared her screen. "The organizational chart, if submitted," she said calmly. "The one attached to the final scope document sent to the federal reviewers." She zoomed in. 1 page, 48 names, 5 from Apex. Her name wasn't among them. No mention, no title, no credit for strategic lead, operational analysis, or supply chain. Just David Chen and 3 junior consultants reading from her stolen notes like it was story time at kindergarten. For a few long seconds, no one said a word. Then Ironclad's director Lisa let out a little chuckle, trying to diffuse the tension. "Oh, that was probably just a formatting issue. I'm sure your name is in the narrative." Eleanor already had that document pulled up. "Checked," she said, scrolling. No mention. She didn't look angry. That's what made it so terrifying. She looked done. Lisa opened her mouth to say something else, but Eleanor beat her to it. "There's a compliance clause in the federal agreement. Section 6.2.2 requires consistency between the submitted team structure and the original project intent. Any material deviation without written approval can trigger a partnership review or even outright disqualification." Still no one dared to breathe. Mark finally stammered. We can fix this, right?" Eleanor just smiled, a cold, empty smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure legal is already looking into it." And they were. Because 3 hours before this meeting, she had submitted a quiet packet of flagged inconsistencies to internal compliance, including the absence of her name on the org chart, the repurposing of phrases from her red-line drafts, and the audio clip of Lisa's estrogen-heavy joke from slide 14. It wasn't a bomb, but it was the detonator. Mark's voice trembled slightly. Let's reconvene tomorrow to finalize any corrections." Eleanor stopped sharing her screen. She didn't sign off. She stayed on the call until everyone else had left, watching in silence as Lisa fidgeted. David feigned a smile, and Mark avoided her gaze as if her face were a mirror he didn't want to look into. When the call finally blinked off, she leaned back in her chair, opened the compliance portal, and refreshed the page. Status pending review. Scope and personnel irregularities. Joint filing. She took a sip of her cold coffee, watching the tiny spinning icon as if it were counting down to 0. They wanted her to be quiet. Fine. She let the clauses do the talking. On Monday morning, the quiet storm Eleanor had been orchestrating for weeks finally made landfall. It started with a knock on her office door. A real knock, not a virtual one. Marcy Heller Apex's senior counsel walked in without the usual pleasantries. She didn't sit. She just placed a single thin file folder on Eleanor's desk and exhaled like someone who had just finished reading a long-lost will. "We pulled the MOU," Marcy said. "The original." Eleanor tilted her head, saying nothing. Marcy opened the folder with a neat snap and tapped her manicured nail on the top sheet. "Clause 9.1, she said as if reading an obituary. "No partner company shall materially alter the team composition from the draft proposal without formal consent of the originating party. Material is defined as any removal or replacement of named personnel in a strategic function." She looked up. "You were listed in the draft, Eleanor." "I know," Eleanor replied calmly. Marcy didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched like someone trying to suppress a smirk in church. Then she offered her the next page, a printout of the email from Marcus Thorne to David Chen and Lisa Han with Mark Connors at Apex CC'd subject alignment, opening speaker. I don't care if she built the damn thing. The last thing we need is that operations girl droning on about compliance metrics and putting everyone to sleep. Cut her. Keep it clean. If leads. Apex supports us. It's cleaner. And honestly, we all know she's replaceable. Time-stamped and dated 4 weeks ago. Eleanor stared at it for a long, silent moment. Not because she needed confirmation she'd been reading those words in Marcus's tone long before they were put to paper, but because now they weren't just disrespectful. They were binding. And more importantly, they were proof of breach of contract. The original Apex Ironclad MOU had been clear. Team structure was not a suggestion. It was a condition. And Marcus, in his wisdom, had documented the decision to remove her without consent while casually calling her a replaceable operations girl. He would have done less damage if he'd punched himself in the face on camera. The legal interpretation is clear, Marcy said. The current filing is invalid unless the original team structure is restored or a formal addendum is approved. But given the tone of this email, she trailed off. She didn't have to finish. Eleanor leaned back, her face unreadable. I assume Apex never signed off on my removal, she said. Never. And Ironclad didn't disclose the change request to the feds. Correct. Eleanor tapped a fingernail against her mug. So we're looking at a clause violation, a compliance breach, and now documented hostility toward a key strategic lead. Hostility from the recruiting director, no less? Marcy added, nodding toward the line where Marcus called her that operations girl. Eleanor didn't roll her eyes, didn't scoff. She simply picked up the file, closed it gently, and set it aside. Then I suppose it's time to escalate. Marcy was already 2 steps ahead. Meeting with the CEO's office at 3. You'll be there. And frankly, she paused, actually looking at Eleanor now. We should have listened sooner. Eleanor offered the faintest of smiles. You weren't supposed to. Not yet. At 3 p.m., she walked into Apex's executive conference room. Mark was already there, sitting in a chair that suddenly looked too big for him. Legal counsel flanked him on either side. His expression was a mix of regret and fear. A man watching the instant replay of a car crash he caused. Eleanor, he said. Thanks for coming. She gave a single nod. Didn't sit. Marcy walked them through the file page by page. Clause 9. 1. The draft org chart, the email. When she read the line, she's replaceable. Eleanor watched Mark physically flinch. There was no shouting, no drama. Just a legal scalpel making a clean incision through bone. Finally, Mark looked up. This puts the entire bid at risk. It nullifies it, Marcy corrected. Technically, Apex can pull out and force a rebid of the whole thing. Mark turned to Eleanor. Are you sure you want to take it that far? She finally spoke. I'm not taking it anywhere, Mark. They wrote me out. You let them. He opened his mouth, some apology flickering behind his eyes. But she didn't wait for it. She stood up, gathered her file, and said, I'll let you know what I'm recommending tomorrow after I speak with my federal contact. The room was silent as she walked out. No victory speech. No, I told you so. Just the sound of her shoes on the carpet and the applause echoing in the minds of men who thought silence meant weakness. It didn't. It meant ready. The conference room they'd borrowed was unimpressive, bland hotel-grade carpet, a sad ficus in the corner, and a whiteboard no one had ever touched. But what happened inside it would incinerate months of billion-dollar handshakes and smug smiles. Apex's legal team had called this side meeting under the guise of a compliance huddle. No one from Ironclad Financial was invited, just Eleanor, Marcy from legal, a second outside counsel who specialized in government contracts, and CO Mark, who looked like he'd aged 5 years since Friday. Everyone knew something was wrong. No one had said it out loud. Not until Eleanor slid her phone across the table. The screen was unlocked, showing an email chain labeled, If restructure, final. No fanfare, no explanation. Marcy picked it up first, began scrolling. The outside counsel leaned in, reading over her shoulder. It didn't take long. There it was. Marcus Thorne's infamous line, "The last thing we need is that operations girl droning on about compliance metrics." And the one that followed, "Cut her. Keep it clean. If leads. Apex supports us." That one line, "If leads. Apex supports us," was enough to start the clock. The outside counsel exhaled slowly through his nose, a long, tired breath like he'd just realized he was about to earn his entire monthly retainer in a single hour. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "violates federal ethics language." Marcy nodded. "Agreed. It undermines the integrity of the joint bid. And the way they restructured the team without notification and with hostile language, Clause 6.2.2 got us halfway to legal standing. Clause 9.1 finishes the job." Mark rubbed his temples, saying nothing. Eleanor finally spoke. "I recommend we withdraw." Everyone looked at her. She wasn't smiling, wasn't gloating. Her voice was so even it made the table feel off balance. "This is going to blow up anyway," she continued. "Either the federal board catches the discrepancy and disqualifies us mid-presentation, or this leaks post-award and becomes a PR firestorm tied to an ethics violation. There is no clean win here, not with Ironclad Financial still in the driver's seat. We either cut them loose now or we get dragged down with them later." Marcy looked at the outside counsel, who gave a single definitive nod. "I'll draft the withdrawal language," he said. "We can position it as an internal decision rooted in ethical compliance." Mark still hadn't said anything. Eleanor turned to him. "If you want me to lead the next version of this bid," she said, "it will be without them." Mark looked like a man being forced to swallow a golf ball. Then finally he asked, "Do you really think they'll fall apart without us?" Eleanor didn't blink. "I know they will. Because, and this was the part no one wanted to say out loud, Ironclad Financial didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the models. They didn't have the logistical sequencing or divergence. All of that had come from Eleanor's brain. The documents they'd lifted from Apex's shared drives at 2:14 a.m. might have looked flashy, but she was the one with the detailed blueprints. And if Apex withdrew now, citing breach of contract and ethical non-compliance federal procurement, wouldn't just nod, they'd dig, they'd look. And once they looked, they'd find repurposed phrases without attribution, swapped names without consent, and a very unfortunate quote from Marcus Thorne's inbox that sounded an awful lot like gender-based exclusion. So yes, she knew they would fall apart. Because she wasn't just holding a clause. She was holding the pin, and the grenade had rolled under the table long ago. Marcy gathered the documents. The outside counsel sketched out the initial withdrawal framework on a legal pad, with an actual pen and paper, as if he needed the weight of the ink. By the time Eleanor left the room, the gears were already turning. The official presentation was scheduled in less than 24 hours. Ironclad Doyle still had no idea that the ground beneath their feet had been cut away with surgical precision. They wouldn't hear thunder. They would hear a single sentence, a calm decision, and the snap of the rope pulling their $1.2 billion dream into the abyss. The room was built to project gravitas. A mahogany table long enough for 20 soundproofed walls, 2 flags in the corner, and a water pitcher no one ever touched. The kind of room where billion-dollar bids were born or bled out. Eleanor sat 3 seats down from the end of the table, a black notebook in front of her, pen uncapped, but unmoving. Apex on one side, Ironclad Financial on the other. Opposite them were the 3 Federal Review officials, name badges clipped to lanyards, faces unreadable. Ironclad Financial was mid-presentation. Lisa, their director, was speaking in that polished, neutral consultant voice that sounds like it was installed at birth. Beside her, David Chen clicked through the slides. The transitions were smooth, the fonts were large, the stolen phrases glowed on the screen like cheap fireworks. By implementing phased alignment and asynchronous logistical overlap, Lisa was saying, we ensure zero resource cannibalization across procurement lines. Eleanor blinked once. Asynchronous logistical overlap. Her words, lifted straight from version 9.4 of the draft she'd written 6 weeks before they locked her out. She glanced at David. He was nodding along like a man convinced of his own genius. Finally, Lisa said, "We want to stress our comprehensive framework built to focus on efficiency without redundancy." Eleanor's name. Nowhere. She felt it then. The vibration, that weird subterranean current that lives behind your ribcage when power shifts in silence. She looked over at her CEO. Mark met her gaze. It wasn't a question. It was a search for confirmation. A final check before pulling the pin. She gave a single nod. No ceremony, no raised voice, just a quiet hand reaching across the table to slip his phone into the palm of Apex's legal counsel. The lawyer didn't need instructions. He just scrolled, paused, his eyes hardening. Then, leaning close to Mark's ear, he whispered 4 words, "Kill the deal now." And Mark, who had fumbled and faltered and rationalized for months, finally did something decisive. He closed his folder with both hands, leaned back, and spoke loud and clear. "Apex Dynamics is withdrawing from this joint proposal on ethical grounds." The silence that followed wasn't like a pause. It was like a verdict. One of the federal officials raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Mark repeated it. Slower, sharper. "We are withdrawing, effective immediately." Lisa's smile broke like a windshield hit with a brick. David dropped his clicker. Ironclad Financial's lawyer was already on his feet, sweat already beading. "Can we request a brief recess?" But the room had already shifted. The equilibrium was gone. There was no negotiation left, just the smell of something burning. Eleanor stood up, gathered her notebook, and straightened her blazer like it was armor. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Behind her, Mark added, "Eleanor Vance will be leading our revised proposal. Independently." The phrase hung in the air, soft then strong, as if it had been waiting in the walls. The federal reviewers exchanged a look. One gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of nod that says, "Finally someone brought an adult." Eleanor walked out first, not fast, not triumphant, just steady. The heel of her shoe clicked once on the polished floor. Then again. The only sound in the room. Behind her, papers rustled. Voices broke into chaos. A partnership collapsing like scaffolding in a hurricane. By the time she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed. A text from Marcy confirming. Ethics issue flagged. If cannot proceed. She had just sunk them. Eleanor smiled. Not with joy, but with precision. Because in the end, it wasn't anger, it wasn't noise, it wasn't a viral confrontation or a public meltdown. It was an email, a clause, a woman who refused to scream, and a $1.2 billion dream that died with the closing of a folder. Not with a bang, but with a whisper.